I spoke a lot of time, and I found three time slots in conferences the most difficult one. Before lunch, everyone is like so hungry, they rush to go to lunch. After lunch, everyone is sleeping. First talk, second day. Usually no one show up because there is a party a day before, right? So, but I'm glad to see you, everyone. I mean, the most important thing right now is I'm standing here, some of you sitting there, and we are back. We are back. Actually, I say it again, and you just say, yay, maybe. Let's do it. We are back. Yes. Seems like situation is over or getting over slowly, and I'm very happy with that. But you know, we've seen this sign in the last 3 years, maybe a lot of time. Well, it had some downsides for sure, down like disadvantages, sitting home, being locked down, you know. But for some of us, maybe it had some advantages too, like especially for software engineers, especially for open source maintainer. Like we had a lot of extra hours to sit and maybe contribute to open source from time to time, and you know, and maybe have some interesting conversation as well. Like I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and he's a businessman. He was asking me like, oh, what are you doing these days? Like you have a lot of time, spare time. I said, oh yeah, it's a great time. I actually started reconnecting to open source. And you know, I have some packages, you know, I maintain that and do a lot of extra features. And I don't know, you know, he asked, oh, are you also making money? And I said, well, usually you don't when you contribute to open source. I mean, but here's the funny things. I told him during that time that, you know, I do that and a lot of other people are doing the same thing because we believe that this is changing the way that we are even living right now. I told him, look at your phone, look at your fridge, look at your car right now. I guarantee the software that is running there for those applications, maybe each of them, 50%, even more, is built or at least has some kind of footprint in open source. So we're using free software to build those great applications, changing people's life. And one of the other things that I was thinking during this time was like the way that open source innovate different way of building applications. We learn from, you know, from the past, from the software that has been developed for years for free, and now we are putting that together to innovate and build something better. And I think one of those open source softwares right now is Flutter. I've been involved in this community for over 5 years, and the way that Flutter is now building the application and compiling to 6 platforms is interesting. We're going to talk about this today a bit together, and we see like how even one open source software can change the way that we manage packages, plugins, dependencies, and even communities. So that's the idea of this talk. Well, there are some technical part as well to give you some inspiration, but it's mainly about the lessons that I learned personally in the last couple of years maintaining big packages in this ecosystem. So what we're going to do together today is we're going to go quickly through these new era of building cross-platform applications and talking about some technical details. And then we go through like the open source mindset and how community and ecosystem is maintaining these, packages and generally ecosystem for Dart and Flutter. Not particularly for this particular community, but for everything else, like how we can be inspired and then apply that to other communities too. Well, let me introduce very quickly myself. My name is Majid. I'm flying from Oslo today here, and in fact, I'm going back very quickly after my talk. I just came here to see you. It's a very exciting moment for me to be on a stage. I am head of DevRel at Invertase, an open source company. We're just building open source software, many of them free. And I'm also a Google developer expert for Flutter and Dart. And being a part of a community, leading the communities, different communities for years. Let's talk about Flutter. Well, initially, a couple of years ago when Flutter came out, especially like when I visited Flutter for the first time, it was beta, at beta stage. And there were only two platforms, iOS and Android. The initial goal was to make building mobile application easier. Slowly, over years, now we've seen 6 platforms that is added to Flutter, and you can now just write your one language Dart code and it will compile to different platforms. You build desktop application, and it's interesting that this innovation, the way that it's working right now, and with other open source, companies and communities, for example, Canonical is one of the big part of Flutter right now, bringing Flutter to Linux ecosystem. And when you look at that, when they announced it last year, you see that they are working very hard to make Flutter as a first citizen into Linux, or at least Ubuntu. That opens up a lot of windows, right? So you can simply now build not only those that are involved in Linux ecosystem, but also other developers are slowly getting into other communities, including Linux. But here's the thing. You now open up this window, but it's not just about the framework. Many times it's about the ecosystem around the framework, which makes, or the community around it, which makes that particular piece of software successful, to my opinion. You come up and say, oh, now we have this platform, we have this base, fantastic, but how can we make these dependencies to share with other people, and people can build their application easier? Well, you come up with like, okay, now we have platform, just go with if and else, start, let's say if that, if this. Flutter gives you an opportunity to also communicate with native layer. We're gonna go through that quickly. But not very pleasant, because not everyone is expert in all of these 6 platforms, right? It's very hard to be very expert in C++, as well as Java, as well as not just the language itself, but the entire platform. If you are expert in Windows, then maybe it's a little bit difficult to be expert also in Mac. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's rare, right? So we need to find a better way. And this is exactly, I think I've seen it over the last couple of years, how the way that we maintain and manage this ecosystem getting better and better. That's what we're going to talk today. And then, as I said, you need different skill sets for now. This is a giant, ecosystem. So now you need to have, let's say, a package or a plugin that is needed by community to build or to get a battery status of a device. Now you're not thinking about iOS only, not thinking about Android. You need to think about how to get it from web, how to get it from Linux devices, Mac devices, Windows devices, and etc. Well, before going through that, let me explain about how Flutter enables the developers to communicate with native code. Just to give you an overview, Flutter has a feature named Platform Channels, where you open up a channel, a method channel or an event channel. There are two different channels. The difference here is that either you have like a one-time job, you want to just call, get something, and you're done, or you need a stream of data. Like, example would be charging battery, right? You constantly need to listen to that status to see if it's changing or not. So in each host, Flutter is giving you this opportunity to open up a messaging system, which also gets these messages going, forward and backward, let's say, and they also automatically becoming serialized and deserialized. And then you can send these messages and get the result, whatever you want to do. So you have a layer of Dart, which is the main language behind Flutter, and then you have these native code. You have C in Linux or C++ in Windows or like Kotlin in Android and so on and so forth. So there's one exception to that is like usually for web, you don't need this kind of communication. You can get that either via JS interoperability, and it's a very difficult word for me to pronounce, and or there's a Dart package named Dart HTML where you can get the window, properties from browser. So that's the way you can manage that. This is a little bit different. But let's take a look at some example here. Is that visible? Okay, because this monitor is not visible, at least here. I'll look at this here. If you look at it right now, the way that it's managed, like you have your Flutter application or a Dart layered, a Dart application. It's not a Dart application, I mean Dart layer in Flutter application. You open up a method channel, name it, and then you will invoke some methods. Let's say this is an example, get a battery, and that is going to, this is an asynchronous job, so you wait for the result to come back. And in fact, what it does, let's take a look at a Kotlin, like for an Android host, and that applies to other platforms too, like similar. Not exactly the same, but similar. So you have a channel, and then you have a package in Android where it's provided by Flutter. It's like a glue. So you open up this method channel, the same one that you opened in Dart layer. You listen to that method that is invoked, and then, well, get the battery level in Android in any way that you do. The get battery level function is just an example. What you might have some logic here for your host. That is the native code. So you just run that, invoke that. That's an asynchronous. Get that and resolve back to the main layer. Another example would be, now this is, as I told you, is similar. Like this is for Windows implementation. The same thing, but in Windows. So now you have, again, your method channels. You're going to open up these, channels, and then you will have some kind of handler to listen to this, method. And once you do that, that's then is easy. You listen to these function names, do whatever you want to do, and then send the result back. It's pretty interesting. I mean, not that hard. You see, there's no bridge, nothing here. It's just a message communication between your Dart layer and native layer. That enables us now to build packages or dependencies that is one dependency to Flutter, but in fact run the same thing on all platforms. We get into that slowly, just bear with me. There's one thing here is that, well, not all of these not always you need primitive types, right? Many times you have your custom types, your custom object class, then you want to serialize and deserialize that as well to have a type-safe communication. So, well, there is a tool for that, at least for Android and iOS, and I hope that this is expanding to other platforms soon, to other platforms too soon, and that is Pigeon library. That's leveraging code generation for building these type of type-safe communication. Let's come back to the ecosystem again. Okay, now we know how we can build this stuff. It's open to community. All right, well, it will be a little bit challenging here because you need to define a way that is pretty maintainable. Like now we know this is open, like a method channel. I open these platform channels and communicate, but then should I write everything in my Flutter code, in Dart? How can I extract it? How can I communicate with 6 different people with different skill sets and still maintain a package that doesn't break anything in any platforms? So it must be scalable, right? So you start with Android and iOS because, well, you are a maintainer and you're expert in these 2 packages, but then slowly you're asking other maintainers to jump in and extend your packages, support other platforms. Well, there must be some solid pattern here that is like a standard or a consistent way of building these packages or plugins. Luckily, there is a way, and that is named Federated Plugins in Flutter. That's an interesting approach. We're going to go through that very quickly again together, a little bit technical, and then learns from that. So imagine, as a customer, as a developer, you don't want to deal with 6 platforms, right? Well, even if you are going to build an application with Flutter and you want to have all 6 platforms supported, still you want one dependency. You don't want to deal with 6 dependencies. It's good to have battery as a dependency, and then forget about all the other platforms. You just call some kind of method from this package in your Dart layer where you write your code. So that's Federated Plugins. How is working is something that I'm going to go through it right now. But many of the things that I mentioned right now, I will mention, it's about these packages, plus packages. There's a story behind it. Around 3 years ago, or maybe a little bit more, these packages are the packages maintained, there were packages maintained by Flutter team itself. But it was only support for 2 platforms, Android and iOS. Then a bunch of people from community and me, we get together and said, okay, now we need to step up and then take these plugins. These are major plugins in that ecosystem. Like if you come to Flutter and start building an application, I doubt you don't need any of these. You probably need one of these packages, at least. It's a very major plugin, like used by millions of developers. So we said, okay, let's actually fork this and then start building a better packages out of it and adding support for all platforms. We had some expert in different, ecosystem like Linux experts, Windows experts, and so on and so forth. We did that, And then after a year almost, the Flutter team came back and said, your packages are much better than ours. We will depreciate ours, the main one, and we refer everyone to your packages. And now this is a community effort packages that everyone is using. Another example that is using federated approach is Firebase. FlutterFire is the Firebase packages for Flutter. Firebase services. All these services, these are maintained by the company that I'm working right now, Invertase. Open source, free, and we have again the federated approach. If you think of it, it's a lot of services from Firebase, and each of them needs to have supported in each platform. It's hell a lot of work. We learned a lot from building this as open source packages, which I'm going to share with you. But let me give you an example to just understand what are these federated approaches, plugins. Imagine, we're talking about an example here, battery. Probably easy one to understand. So if you go to the battery folder under our repository right now, you find 6 folders for each platform probably. One folder, which is Battery Plus, and another one, the interesting one, Platform Interface. Like perhaps each of these plugins have at least 8 folders, or 6 in this case, because Android and iOS are under the first one. But it can be also a separate folder. So if you look at this right now, it's interesting things. So then the Linux, Mac, Web, Windows, these are pretty self-explanatory. They're probably doing something with that particular platform. But what is the first one and the platform interface? First of all, I mentioned several times package versus plugins. Let's clarify that. Dart packages are the packages that are purely written in Dart, and there is no communication with native part of it. So it's just Dart layer. That's packages that usually we call it in Flutter ecosystem. And the plugin packages are the ones that they communicate with native platforms. So when I say plugin, then I mean communicating with native. So based on those folders, then we can immediately categorize these plugin packages and Dart packages. We have app face packages where it's purely package, Dart package. It's communicating, it's the frontier package for developers. They're just gonna use this one. Add this app facing and you're done. Then you're gonna have the platform packages where you've seen those folders, specifically writing logics for each specific platform. And then you're gonna have platform interface. This is like a glue. You define your contract, and then you say, okay, the battery platform interface is going to be similar to this. Then everyone who is going to implement for each platform needs to depend on this platform interface and provide the same functionality. You may also think like, oh, well, it might be a little bit difficult to create all of these packages by hand, or maintain them. Well, luckily, the Flutter CLI is actually a great tool under your hand that you can generate all of these folders and everything that is needed at least as a template. So you can just go ahead and run a simple command and get your Linux, Mac, iOS, whatever. Or you can create your package. Then after you're done, let's take a look at the architect. Like we talked about 3 different type of packages here, app-facing platforms and then interface. In fact, your application is going to be dependent on the app-facing platform, which is Battery Plus in this case. And the Battery Plus is going to be dependent on other packages, Linux, Mac, etc. And then all of those, including the app facing, is dependent on the platform interface. Okay. let's take a look at just quickly how they glue together. If you look at, like in each software, we know that there is probably some kind of file that is defining configuration, or like for example in Dart we have pub/spec YAML file where you define your dependencies, project names, and so on and so forth, including a property name for Flutter where you define your plugin. Here is the case. You go ahead and here you define under a package your implementation of each of these platforms. This one shows like, okay, the class, plugin class, it seems like everything is under one folder, but I showed you different folders for each platform. How does that work? Then that is the way that we named it endorsed implementation. We learned from the community, from this effort in these major platforms, this is a good approach to have these, plugin packages as an independent package. And then in the main app-facing package, we just dependent on these platform ones. Here is an example. So we're depending in the main one, Battery Plus, that's the name of package. We're depending on all other the platforms packages, and then we just in the configuration say this is going to use this default package. Why this is better? This is better because then now I don't need to even have Battery plus Linux under the same folder. One of you can jump in and say, hey, I can maintain this. I say, okay, just go ahead and maintain this folder and just make sure that you're always up to date with the platform interface, and you publish your, you maintain your package, even publish it. We're just depending on that. That's it. Distributing the work to the community in this way. All right. If you take a look at a pub/spec YAML file of these packages very quickly, we see that this is exactly the same thing that we had in the beginning. We're just trying to make it smaller, particularly for each package. Nothing really special here, except that, you're depending on platform interface. We take a look at some code as well. Let's take a look at some code to just give you an idea, like right now, what is this platform interface that we're talking? So the platform interface, in fact, is, as I said, it's just an interface. It's a contract between you and all the other authors, right? So you define your method that you want to have, your properties, and then you also need to depend on plugin platform interface from Flutter. That is enforcing some, glue from the plugins, from the Flutter team. So you depend on that. Here is, you see, I just now creating my contract interface, and then I have my Battery plus method, where you got an idea, right? So then we had a method channel or event channel to communicate with native, but this is a Dart layer. In fact, the method channel that we discussed in a few slides before will be in this platform channel. Then all the authors, they don't really care about that. They just call a method that is invoking the same, method name. So now all of us, all maintainers, we have 6 maintainers for just one package because, well, different platforms requires different skill sets. Then they know how to do stuff. So then in your main Battery Plus, in fact, then you don't care about those if and else anymore. You just call a platform instance, and then Flutter inject the right one for you. That's pretty much it. Now, you don't care about which platform. You have your dependencies. You go ahead and just use it. An exception, again, would be web. We've talked about it because web doesn't really communicate with that. Instead, we can use Dart HTML. Like in this case, you can get the battery status from browser navigator. So in this case, you can have an exception of this instance, right? So, phew. so many things in a quick time, so many codes. Well, you know, the purpose of the talk is usually in conferences, talks are here to teach you something, give you some idea, but mainly it's for inspiration, right? So you need to get your time later, go through this again and review it once. Now we talked about the technical part. You at least get some idea how stuff works. We're coming to the open source maintenance. The stories. Well, this was just the beginning. Now you have 6 developers maintaining a package for different platforms. Well, the most important challenge starts from your machine, your local setup. Well, you're building a package that is requiring other packages. Okay, well, if you are all under one monorepo or one repo, that's even easier. You can have these paths there. If not, then that's even more challenging. So, and also think about not just the paths that you need to change all the time because you want to develop, but then you have these local paths. You want to publish it to pub as a repository, then you see that doesn't work because, well, you can't have a local path and publish a public package. Challenges starts. So then you have versioning and releasing. Well, you change a platform interface, which should rarely change, by the way, but then you change a number and then you see, oh, you have 6 other dependencies. Now you need to bump all the others version. You need to come back to each platform. You need to realize what has changed and so on and so forth. Well, you know, there are lots of challenges here. And imagine that, as I said, one platform contract changes. It's hell a lot of work to communicate with even other developers. Then how can we fix that? This is what I love about open source. And in the beginning, I said the innovation comes. In fact, so we started thinking about these problems, and then we saw, at least in Invertase, when we've been building these packages, we saw that, oh, our development time increased significantly as we are growing these packages, right? We're very slow of publishing and maintaining these packages. We started thinking, like, how can we fix that? Then we said, okay, let's now build something that fixes this problem. And if it fixes for me, it can fix that for many of you. We started building another system or another software or another package named Melos, where it's a monorepo management tool. It's handling all of those problems that I mentioned, fixing, you know. Here is the thing. So you have an open source system. It gives you an opportunity to build other open source systems. Then you are building that, you find out there is a problem, and then you go ahead and innovate and build. Slowly, these open source systems are getting better and better and better. And then generally, the entire ecosystem getting better. That's the beauty of having open source and learn from that. Well, that's not the only thing. Testing. Who is writing unit tests for your application? Who is writing unit tests for the application you're developing? What if I tell you that writing unit tests in this case, it's not helpful? You write unit tests, you think that you're testing everything, and then you go ahead and publish and you figure out, oh, there are lots of bugs, not because of tests, but because everything should work together. The unit test doesn't catch anything in this case. So in this type of ecosystem, you realize that, oh, you know, maybe end-to-end testing is much more important. It's a bit different from what you hear because, well, usually say you need to spend more time on less costly type of test, which is unit test probably, but then more time on unit test and less time on integration test, which is more costly. But in our case, we realized that, you know, we need to spend more time on integration test because well, it really doesn't matter if one platform itself by itself doesn't work. It should work all together. You spend time and realize that, but then you go ahead and run your tests. You write a lot of unit tests, integration tests, go ahead, and then you realize, oh, well, we've written like 500 tests, different tests. We run tests, and it takes hours to run. Wow. We need to innovate again. We need to fix this problem. And here is what is kind of nice about community. They come in and they jump in and say, oh, you know, there is a problem here and we need to fix this. We innovated again with a package named spec. We said, now we don't have proper error messaging and tests. We don't have, you know, these kind of stuff. Let's go ahead and build another system to fix that. And we built that. Now we run tests simultaneously. We just run tests that are failed, not the one that we don't need to run all the tests, and so on and so forth. Again, the beauty of open source. You're slowly improving, you know, ecosystem because you feel there is something wrong there. The code quality. I should mention that when you're working on a package that you have 6 maintainers and that is growing very fast also, and people are coming and going, nothing is more important than having a consistent way of coding. You don't want everyone writes in any way that they like, right? So it should be some consistent way. And I should mention that you need to automate as much as possible. The more time we spend there, the better probably. So, and another interesting thing that I've seen in the last couple of years of at least being part of these big projects is the partnerships. A lot of maintainers in open source ecosystem, they're doing their stuff in silo, and where you can actually get into, you know, other maintainers, propose what you think is good, and then, well, maybe there is a chance, and here is the chance. We found that, well, maybe by partnershiping with maybe Canonical, for example, we can build a better desktop application for Linux. And that brings innovation. So sometimes as maintainer of open source, we need to get out of, you know, what we're doing and think about other systems, try to integrate, try to propose different things. That brings more innovation and genuinely building better software for the entire humanity. So many other things that I can mention here. When you have these massive ecosystem of maintainers for these major packages, then it's really important. I learned that by heart, by seeing in action. You need to be open as much as possible. Tools are there to help us. Like you are under GitHub, for example, you're gonna have discussion, then open that discussion and use and leverage that. You know, we learned that. Be open. You want to change something, open it to community and publish it and ask people's opinion about it. This is good if we are empowering people, developers, and we are encouraging them to coming back to us with their feedbacks. Usually we are building better things. So, as I said, then it's an open source software. There is nothing hidden here, right? So you can be very open and transparent. So, another thing that we learned is that, you know, many times maintainers, well, we are human. We don't sometimes have time. We need to spend on other things. Life sometimes is difficult, sometimes is easy. You know, we all know that. So, inviting others to help us, even as an ad hoc, you know, contributor, is a great thing. This must be a continuous, you know, effort from maintainers, I believe. So continuously we invite people for different purposes. Like, okay, this is Hacktoberfest. All right, let's go and have a challenge. You can come and contribute to our packages. It is another event. Oh, fantastic. Let's have another challenge. You can come to, this is what we did. You can go to like open source companies and ask for even swag and stuff like that. Say if anyone is contributing to these packages and fixing this problem and things like that, so you can get these kind of swags from X company. The purpose here to have a vibrant community around your package, not only being you alone there. That will be a little bit frustrating over time and may kill your project. We learned that. We started doing that over the last 2 years. In fact, right now we have a challenge of sending PR, getting stickers. And developers are in love with the stickers anyway. They want the stickers. By the way, I brought you Flutter stickers, and they are there out there, a lot of them. So think about the social media also. It's a powerful tool under your hand, especially Twitter. Tech Twitter, I realized it's very vibrant, and so you can get help by just posting. I've seen that a lot of time myself. And if you're leading a project like that big, maybe take a step forward and be a little bit proactive. Set up meetings face to face. Just ask people if you want to meet. Not, if you can't meet it physically, you can meet virtually. At least the last 3 years of COVID showed us how we can meet virtually properly. So do that. We need to do that. We learned that this is a great thing for maintaining these big packages or plugins. All right. It's 45 minutes that I'm speaking, and I'm happy that still you're looking at me. So no one is sleepy, so that's good. Let's summarize. I shared with you not only the technical part. My main goal of this talk, this keynote, was to share with you the things that we learn from these big open source projects and the way that we manage it, and we try to manage it even better every day. We are still learning every day. We went through some of these, cross-platform thingy that Flutter, how it manages. We didn't dive into it, but that wasn't the purpose of this talk. You can just look at that later. We learned about, these way of managing plugins and having a cross-platform, and also the lessons that we learned from having these big open source project with so many maintainers. In fact, one thing that I want to tell you at the end is it's pretty, to me, I learned a lot from just by doing open source, and I believe we can all level up by just doing open source. Be active, contribute, help maintainers, please. So we are all human. We can help each other to make software better and better. With that said, thank you very much for listening to me. I actually spoke a little bit faster to give you some time to ask questions. So if you have any question, please raise your hand. Happy to answer. You can find my slide, by the way, on slides.com/myhandler. This is my handler, by the way. You can find me anywhere on internet with this handler. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Actually, I have two questions.
Sure.
So the first one is, how did Canonical help to make Flutter work on Linux, and in what way? And the other is, I imagine for the graphic part, the UI part, you have a plugin, so you have all the various platforms supported. So on Linux, how does it work? Does it use GTK or Qt under the hood or stuff like that?
Yeah. For the first one, I actually don't know the deal because that's something with Flutter team and Google. But what I know is, as far as it's open, I know that they adopted Flutter as a first citizen for building Linux application for Ubuntu. So I reference some link there. You can take a look, see how you can build application and even publish it so other people can use it. So I know that they also started using Flutter for rebuilding some of their infrastructure. For example, the Linux installer. So they started rebuilding that with Flutter, and by doing that, exactly the same thing that we've done with packages, they realized, oh, there are something missing, or we need to contribute, we need to add more thing and more thing, and so far we've seen a great progress, especially for Linux, because Canonical is quite big in that sense, and they're trying to add these kind of support and progress to Flutter. There is also one more thing that I want to mention, just came to my head. Microsoft is also contributing to Flutter for supporting foldable devices. They are the main contributor in that part. So as far as I know, they have like a team, small team in Microsoft that they just contributing to Flutter to make Flutter better on Linux, on Windows and foldable devices particularly. This is interesting. And this is the thing that I mentioned in the beginning. Open source, you learn, you innovate, and then it opens some windows, and then other players come in and say, start, making that better and better. And this is interesting to me. Regarding the second question, you need to understand how Flutter renders, renders the graphic that you mentioned. Flutter uses a library called Skia, and Skia is a C++ engine for 2D graphic and stuff like that. So, in fact, in Flutter, if I want to explain it very quickly, it's Flutter giving you a canvas, and then you are an artist. It's exactly like that. You have a canvas, you have tools, painters, colors, etc., and you start building. And a Skia, based on those abstraction, then you have those things. Skia will render that on the engine. So behind the scenes, perhaps there are lots of things that is taking care. I'm not really sure about the details, but this is how it works. So in fact, then this is a way that you manage building cross-platform application. So there is something behind the scenes over there. Even on web, you have some kind of version of a Skia with WebAssembly. Still, you have Canvas on web. You're still building Flutter application.
Also, just I did sit in on a few meetings at Canonical about the Flutter work we've been doing. To answer your question about GTK and Qt, my understanding is that Flutter is not rendering into either of those toolkits natively. It's more that the Canonical team has provided the Yaru theming kit for Material platform, so it looks native, but it's actually a totally separate rendering. It's just been made.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. I forget about it. Yes.
Other questions, comments? There's one.
Please forgive my bad English. If I understood well, in the way you decided to manage the things changed over time.
Yeah.
In one point, you decided to rely on the community more and more. Given that, in your opinion, the design of the whole project could have been different if you could have managed to understand this thing from the start.
Yeah.
Because I think that you made some decision, very basic decision, the language, the structure of the platform, and perhaps there's some lesson here that can be used in a future revised new version of this thing. Perhaps, doing is like Tao in the way you learn things.
Yeah, well, that's actually a very good question. Well, many of the things I mentioned here is something that Flutter team actually evolved, and we started using and giving them feedback. One of the things I like about Flutter community right now, or particularly Flutter team, is that they're listening and actively, every quarter, for example, they run survey and ask for like what is need to be improved, right? So there is a team in Flutter, in Google supporting, that is great, but there's also community here. And when you have this active community, so you realize, oh, you're doing something right now, and then, but it's not right. They don't want this. You think it's right, but they don't want it. So the good thing here is that they actually listened and actively, and they changed it. Federated plugins are one of those things that I mentioned here. In the beginning, it was a little bit harder to maintain these type of, and as the platform is growing and evolving, the way that it's introduced to manage the platform is also evolving. It's a mutual, by the way, kind of contract between community and the team and maintainers, you see. So it's a two-way communication. And I think this is one of the reasons that this community, particularly the Flutter community and Flutter project by itself, is growing very fast. Because, well, we had a problem of managing packages, and as the platform is growing, and there was like a product owner of developer experience. They're just working on how to make the developer experience better for the ecosystem. And they're listening to developers and at least active maintainers constantly and evolving. I believe, well, I know that if they knew right now what is right, they could have done it 5 years ago, but that's the way we build software. We realize when we build and we test and we get feedback, and slowly we, evolve it. I don't think it's possible to know everything in advance in the beginning and start building that, right? We have some ideas, we start building, and then slowly we get feedback and we evolve it. And this is happening right now, I believe. And I think it's going in a very good direction, to my opinion.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to find out about what are your thoughts on continuous development and documentation.
What? Sorry?
Are your thoughts on continuous development and documentation?
Okay. For a second, I've heard Toyota. Because there is a project with Flutter and Toyota.
Oh, okay,
and I thought
nice.
that you've heard about it.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I actually didn't put that there, but this is one of the challenges when it comes to these massive projects. One thing that we started thinking about documentation is to have like a set of rules to write documentation. The contribution guide is a key here. Something that we all agree here, a contribution guide. We know what we want to document. And also in Flutter and Dart, the Dart tooling is giving you building documentation out of the box. So most of developers, like Dart developers, they know how to document inside code. And, and then we generate document out of it. But then that sometimes writing those type of documentations is not enough. In fact, you need to have more examples. And that's exactly what we learned. We need examples. We started testing all of like integration test stuff in our examples, as well as writing our documentation over there. One challenge was like, one advantage of having this federated approach is that not everyone needs to write human readable document, like for end user, because we have a platform interface, we have a contract. As long as we know how to use those, that's enough for the end user. But when we have another type of documentation for the platform specific code, like for C, like you're writing something in, that's another type of documentation. Usually, we did two things to fix this. First of all, as I said, contribution guide. Secondly, we automated our PRs in a way that checks those contribution guides. That was the part that I said code quality. Automate, automate, automate. Like we have rules, we have agreements, but people are coming and going. It's hard to follow up, right? And also developers, I'm a developer as well, we tend to not to read documentation very thoroughly. We just start the first 2 lines and then it's too much. Let's just skip. We will realize when we build, right? So therefore, automating that is pretty important. We automate these documentation generation. We check if the analysis tools, it's very important. So we have rules, custom rules there say if a public method does not have a documentation, the PR gets rejected automatically. You need to write documentation. And then someone, this is the automate part, but then someone from the maintainer should come and read this PR. Well, I can write 1 line of document. So how many times you've seen in a code that you have a public method and on the document on top it says the exact same method name? That's documented. Well, in the eyes of bot is documented, but how about humans? That's an agreement, right? So it's a little bit difficult, to be honest, to have this agreement, but I told about face-to-face meeting, right? I told about making the team closer, the maintainer team closer together. That solves the problem. So in a way, these are the things that we learned and we did. Yes, exactly.
We can't hear the comments from the audience unless you speak into the mic. And there's a question from back here.
What about Toyota?
There is an effort, not just with Toyota, also BMW and other car makers. They started adopting Flutter for their screen in the machine because technically Flutter is built to throw or, throw anything in any type of a screen. There is actually a saying in Flutter community from one of the product owner as well. It says, if there isn't a screen with pixel, Flutter can render there. And in fact, this is an effort from that. So this is an IoT effort. There's also another effort from Sony that they forked Flutter to kind of experiment with building application for some fridge, not fridge, some IoT devices. So if you search Flutter on Toyota, you probably see some progress right now. So they try to build the car application, the screen for the car with Flutter. So in fact, now my talk name was 1 plugin, 6 platforms. Maybe next year, this time, if I come back, it will be 1 platform, 1 plugin, 7 platforms. It will be IoT as well.